Welcome back to a new video. Before we begin, I just wanted to say that I hope this video opens a discussion for people to chime in and agree and disagree on my points. As an example in this video, I'll be talking about item crafting, and if you disagree or agree with my interpretation about how crafting items relates to skills, then I would love to hear why you agree or disagree, as I would love to learn and see things through a different lens. Let's begin. GGG released a news post that announced that there will be no balance manifesto this patch. We're going to be focusing on one portion of the statement in regards to their balance plans, which is, our balance goals with 3.21 are to provide more options and more fun for as many builds as possible, rather than reworking game systems in potentially disruptive ways. While there are of course some small nerfs, 3.21 is most definitely not a nerf fest. Because options are opening up, this means that skills are getting buffed in some kind of way, or at least we can presume that. We don't know how, but let's talk about how this could happen and how existing systems currently interact with skills. This is important to discuss because we're going to explore and see how adjusting certain game levers or systems affect player power. First, let's talk about the most obvious, which is the skill itself. Let's say you want to buff a skill. Let's choose Sweep for example. Sweep has a few properties: attack speed, attack damage, effectiveness of added damage, and then also has a special property of gaining flat physical damage per level and knocking enemies back on hit. Our goal is to buff this skill, and again, this is our imaginary task if we were asked to buff it. But doing so in the right areas is important. The problems need to be identified. Is the attack speed ratio too low? Is the area of effect not big enough? Does the knockback need to be changed to a different property? Does it need an additional mechanic? And by additional mechanic, I mean examples would be like it maims targets and then stacks maim effect up to a cap. Or let's say another skill like Lightning Tendrils, should it gain AoE as you channel more? Or Divine Ire gains full elemental damage penetration at max stacks, so it rewards you for holding on to it. But again, maybe the problem is just very simple. Does Sweep cost too much mana? Or does it simply just need higher attack damage ratios? As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you may disagree with me and think that wow, adding this extra mechanic with the maiming portion is not a great idea. That's totally fine. The point is exploration and figuring out what could potentially change in these skills, not necessarily concrete solutions. The idea behind these questions is figuring out what is the proper buff for the skill. You can end up buffing the attack damage and not actually improve the feeling or gameplay of the skill because the actual problem is scaling AoE. The opposite could be true, where you decide the damage is fine, but the AoE needs to be buffed. But in reality, it just needs more attack speed, for example. There are a lot of skills that are currently viable, but the big key is making them compelling. Compelling skills make for a much more exciting space for exploration into how they can be scaled and used. Granted, this could just mean that a simple skill like Heavy Strike just needs to tune up on its attack damage numbers. Making a skill more complex isn't always the answer. I wanted to break down skills a bit more than just use the generalized speech of give them more damage. Let's use another example. A slam skill, for instance, which by design is meant to be a longer attack, but each attack is very powerful. I would argue you want very aggressive damage values on such an ability, because it is being gatekept by attack speed values and Warcry cooldowns. Button presses also matter as well in relation to the skill. Let's take this to the extreme. Imagine a skill requires a 10 button rotation to deal damage. The skill is easily the highest damaging skill in the game. It may be, quote, viable, maybe even top tier, but is it fun? Is that good gameplay? Finding a balance between power in each button click and what its response is in accordance to your power is very important. I hope that if skill buffs are the route in which GGG is choosing to go with, I hope that they are targeted in areas where skills need them. In regards to nerfs, as we were told that there will be some, nerfs should be a tool to bring skills in line, but not absolutely obliterate them from the game. Purposely crushing skills is a very poor way to go about adjusting power. Let's say we want to nerf Spark, for instance, as that has been a very popular topic within the community, and if it is going to get nerfed, or by how much. Let's say it's your job to nerf Spark, and you go, yeah, Spark seems popular, let's just nerf it by 80% damage. Okay, great, job's done, we can move on. Well, that's horrible, because we just obliterated it out of existence. when we need to actually sit down and take a look at the problems of the skill and maybe how or why we need to nerf it, see what's making it overpowered. Is it the Nimbus interaction making it overpowered, right? Is it the duration? Is it lasting too long? Is it the projectile count? Are there too many spark particles moving around? Or maybe it's a simple solution. It does just need a flat damage nerf. When players see skills receive nerfs, they don't want to hear that because of this nerf, they can no longer play this skill that they enjoyed. They want to hear that, yes, your skill got nerfed, but it is totally fine and playable. It was just a bit overpowered, but now it's in more line with the rest of the game. You will still have a lot of fun playing with it, and I emphasize fun on purpose. Fun is a concept which can be often overlooked in regards to balance in a PvE game, because sometimes the goal of making every single skill balanced, in a sense, right, overshadows it. You can have a perfectly balanced game, as everything is very power neutral in accordance to one another, but is it fun to play? Does it attract new players? And what's there to be excited about if everything is just very mundane and bland? If players look at a set of patch notes and see all nerfs, then what that translates to is less. Players don't want to see less. When the game takes things away from them and they don't return anything back to the player, it feels bad, and it makes people want to quit. It's hurtful in a sense. Nerfs should be targeted at areas where they are needed and should have a purpose, just as much as buffs, but should not be extraneous. Next we move on to items and crafting. Keep in mind that again, I would love to hear your thoughts on that section if you agree or disagree with anything that I've said. This is meant to be an open discussion, so I'd love to learn, hear feedback, etc. So moving on to the next section, items and crafting are very core game systems. They work hand in hand with supporting skills and your overall build, but they also affect something that I don't think is talked about much, and that's the overall difficulty of the game. Let's again use an extreme example. Imagine the patch notes come and all of a sudden it's very common for players to craft and be walking around in triple elevated gear. As in you've Orb of Dominance to a lot of your gear pieces. So the normality of gear has changed, that when people reach tier 16 maps, they already have triple elevated gear, and then their goal for the rest of the season is to farm for every single affix to be elevated. So by the end of the season, everyone has 6 elevated affixes on every single piece of gear. Well, all of a sudden, the game is a lot easier because your gear is extremely strong. It is giving you way more damage, most likely, and defense than everyone currently has on this patch. And so the monsters that you are facing are in turn easier. Relative power is very important to the content that you are facing. I'm not pitching this as a solution, but just as an example, to show what pulling a lever in one direction does, and in this case to the extreme. I would be considered a veteran player with thousands of hours, and currently in my opinion the game is skewed towards veterans, through its reward of knowledge, of game systems, and mechanics. Having a game support veteran players is important, but there needs to be a bit more of emphasis on newer players. It would be interesting, and I think beneficial, to see crafting be that mechanism to help and overall be accessible to newer players, as that alone could be a major buff to how the game is played. Having access to not even necessarily stronger affixes, but more targeted gear, and I'm not saying not in an item editor sense like the original Harvest, but something to give a path of progression would be more approachable. I for one really like the complexity of crafting and the different options that are given to us, but it does need to be refined. Perhaps this comes in the form of unbricking items, as we once did with reforged suffix or prefix, but maybe this comes in a different form, as bricking an item results in a lost time, which can create frustration. Frustration in that you have devoted your time and energy into making your character better, only for it to be taken away by bad RNG. I'm not asking for affixes to become stronger on items, or to start increasing drop rates on chase items so that the overall, quote, player power is higher. Not at all. I'm just throwing out that the consideration of improvement on items, and more specifically crafting in regards to the fun of it, could be improved as well. Notice I'm not really offering concrete solutions for this topic, and likewise on the first section, I'm just offering some hypotheticals of what could happen, as these are some very big decisions in regards to how the game plays. We are simply just exploring these systems for people to talk about so the game can get better. The final, and very much unknown system is the new league mechanic. We have no idea what the mechanics are. It may introduce new mechanics to our characters and progression that could completely make my other 2 sections void. Those 2 sections may not even matter, because the new league mechanic fills that gap with a ton of power or a new way to approach the game, etc. Right? Who knows? Definitely a possibility, but we will have to see. I would like to add as well that I could have added other topics, but considering that they said they don't want to do big reworks, I think that one of these sections covered should be something along the lines of what they're going to do. I hope that these topics have offered a new perspective on looking at balance from not only a player view, but also a GGG view. It can be hard finding the right levers to tweak, but making an effort at doing so is important. Cleave is a great example. GGG gave it +2 radius thinking that maybe AoE is the problem. We then saw them add Vol Cleave, trying to add additional mechanics to the skill. Maybe next they will try a raw damage buff, who knows. But the fact that they are trying and given attention to skills is crucial, as game design can often be a very hard job in the sense that you need to be able to identify problems and properly not break the game due to things like power creep, which I understand exists and you want to avoid large amounts of it, but what I'm simply proposing is a way to bring up portions of the game to where it should be, in accordance to everything else. I hope that the Crucible patch notes gives attention to a lot of skills to spearhead creativity from the player base and expand the viability of builds, really make things compelling for them. I'm very excited to play next patch, as if done correctly, I think it could be one of the most craziest and best PoE patches we've ever had, and Sanctum was quite honestly a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to it quite a bit. Thank you all for watching, and I would love to hear your thoughts.